is our next Show Me the Links webinar. We're going to do an Ask Us Anything. So my nerves are completely rattled now after that.
That's the worst that could happen. So now we're just upwards, you know?
It can't get any worse, can it? Maybe. Well, it could get worse, actually, because my chat has now disappeared. So let's everybody help out. And just, if you see anything good on the chat, let me know. And I'll try to get it back as we get into this. So I'm Julie Joyce, your host. I own Linkfish Media. I've done this a few times, so I'm not going to bore everybody with details about me. But I wanted to have my guests introduce themselves. We've got Giselle Navarro, Joe Hall, and Marie Haynes. So Giselle, if we could start with you, I just wanted you to introduce yourself and also tell everybody what type of work you do, maybe, and what type of clients you work with. And I'll try to fix my chat.
Okay, so I will take my time then.
Okay, take your time.
Okay, so my name is Giselle. I am the operations director at an agency called Neomam Studios in the UK. And I specialized in building links with content. That's after years of building links without content. And I kind of prefer working with content because it's, I don't know, it's more fun to me. I like creating things. So most of the things that I write about and I like to talk about is just the outreach side of things and how do you actually get somebody to link to your content. And in terms of the work that I do, we work mainly with visual content because we see that working better. So whether it's a GIF or, you know, photography or whatever, data visualization, anything that is visual, that's my specialty. And in terms of clients, lots of clients, I think a big thing is we like to work with in-house SEO teams. So any company that has an in-house SEO team that is strong and savvy in terms of the technical side of things, that's where we go. So we have many clients like, I know, big clients like Expedia or Angie's List or Home Advisor, and then smaller clients that are more startups like Resume.io, like little startup-y, very smart little companies. So yeah, is that enough? Is the chat fixed yet?
Yeah, thank you. Just waiting for my table to collapse or something. So, thank you very much. Joe, do you want to talk about yourself a little bit?
Yeah, sure. My name is Joe Hall. I've been doing SEO for around 10 years now. I currently work for a company called Proficient Digital, and we are a larger agency that does full service digital marketing and development. But our clients are mostly enterprise level clients, so we're looking at big brands, and we do everything under the sun for them as it relates to digital. We recently purchased Stone Temple Consulting, so that brought in a lot of new resources and new talent and a lot of cool stuff. So we could do a lot of stuff with them as well. Yeah. So was that the? Did you have another question? Am I supposed to say something else?
No, you're good. You're good. I just wanted everybody to know kind of what you guys do, like what type of clients you work with. So.
Yeah, I haven't. I'll add one little caveat to myself. I spent about 2 or 3 years aggressively doing nothing but link building, and now I'm more technical. But I have a lot of experience with link building, and it's probably something that I enjoy just as much as technical. It is link building. So
if we get any crazy technical questions, you're our man for that one.
Yes, I still do link building strategy. I just don't do the actual implementation. You know.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Glad to have you here.
Thank you.
Marie, do you want to go? Is Marie still?
Oh gosh, hopefully, yeah. Can you hear me okay? We were just talking before the recording that about internet problems, and usually we're good, but hopefully we're all right. Yeah. Yeah. All right. So you can hear me. So my name is Marie Haynes, and we have an agency here in Ottawa, Canada, with 10 of us on payroll now. And what we mostly do is look at websites that have lost traffic, usually because of an algorithmic update or something like that. For years, my main line of work was in doing Google penalty work and also working with Penguin hit sites. And I've seen, almost every type of link scheme that's out there. I've seen thousands and thousands of examples from Google as links that they have given us on manual penalties as examples of unnatural links. And so my specialty in links is in knowing what kind of thing complies with Google's guidelines and what doesn't.
Excellent. Well, we've got a lot of questions about that people have submitted, so that's awesome. Well, I will jump right in then. We're going to, first of all, I do want to say that, as you can tell, everybody has kind of a different specialty. So not everybody's going to answer every single question, which is our typical format. Some of these questions may just be answerable by maybe one person, so just keep that in mind. We have a few submitted questions. I'm going to start with those just so I can make sure we do answer those, and I appreciate everybody asking. The first one, how do I evaluate whether or not disavowing URLs has actually benefited my site? Marie, do you want to take that one, since that's
Sure,
kind of
yeah. And that's something we could do a whole talk for the entire hour on how to know, should you disavow and has it helped? But I think, so the question is, how do you know, was it actually effective? And
Right.
it's really hard to say. I mean, in most cases, I do believe that most websites these days don't need to disavow, unless you are very, you have a history of links that are there for SEO purposes. So if you're seeing a bunch of spammy image links and really spammy blogspot sites, that every site gets this kind of cruft. And I feel really confident that Google's algorithms can handle the vast majority of those. But so let's say you do know that, okay, in the past we hired an SEO company and they built links that we know are kind of questionable in terms of whether Google would like them. And so you've put together a disavow and you filed it, then really there's, we're going to see one of three things. One is that everything stays exactly the same. And that's usually the case because usually Google's already ignoring those links, and disavowing them shouldn't cause any improvements. It's rare, but we do see some cases where we see traffic drops. This is usually if somebody files a disavow and doesn't really know what they're doing. And then if we do see improvement, it can happen anywhere from a few days to a couple of weeks, in my experience, after filing the disavow. And you don't tend to see this massive, jump up. It's more of a gradual increase that, you can pinpoint to happening shortly after you've filed the disavow. And I should say there is a fourth scenario too, is sometimes Google will put out link-related updates and we can suddenly see a jump up. I think that whatever happened on September 27th, just recently, was maybe connected to links in some aspect, because we've had some clients where we filed the disavow and then suddenly they started to see a gradual improvement starting on that date. So it's hard sometimes, but it should, if it's going to improve, you should see things within a couple of weeks, would be my experience.
Oh, wow. What's the longest you've seen it take?
Well, pre-Penguin, I mean, when Penguin was older and you could only recover once Google reran the algorithm, we went a time frame where it was 2 years almost before people could even recover. And then the thing is, if the recovery starts happening more than a few weeks past where you filed your disavow, it gets hard to say, was it my disavow or was it, a quality change? Because most of us are working on multiple things on the website. So it's hard to answer that exactly. But, I think if it's been 2 or maybe 3 weeks and you've seen no improvement, then there's a chance that you're not going to see future improvement.
Okay. Anybody else have anything to add to that? Seems pretty clear. Marie, we actually just got another question for you. Do you think guest posting on related industry sites is a good strategy for sites that have used blackhat SEO in the past?
So again, I mean, this is a topic we could do a whole hour on as well. I think that there is some place for guest posting, but not a lot. And so what I'm seeing now is a lot of people are guest posting as their sole way of getting links. And there was something John Mueller said years ago, was like, Google can see if all of your links are coming from guest posts, then probably Google doesn't want to count those. And so my advice for guest posting is to only guest post on sites where there's a good chance you're actually going to get some business from that guest post. So, if I guest post for Semrush, and there's a good chance that I'm going to actually get clients from that. Whereas if I'm guest posting for just this random site that says they'll publish my post and get a link, probably that's not even going to help me. This is controversial, but I actually think that Google is ignoring the vast majority, like maybe even as high as 95% of the links that are on the web, that they're completely ignoring them. And I think a lot of people are putting time and effort into guest posting that maybe isn't that beneficial. So, the short version is, if you guest post in places where you're going to get business and you don't do it on a massive scale, then it has the potential to help you, in my opinion.
Okay. So that actually answers another question we had from the chat. Does Google ignore, bad URLs, or should you disavow them? So
does anybody else want to jump in here? I don't want to monopolize the whole conversation.
That's the thing about having specialists, so I think you're just kind of known for all this. But
there's a lot of questions about disavowing too, because it's so not well communicated by Google. So, should we still disavow? Really? And you're going to get different opinions here, and I would like to see what Joe has to say on this. But I say, again, only if you've got a history of very manipulative links, and maybe in some negative SEO cases, if you already have a link profile that you wouldn't be comfortable showing the web spam team. And otherwise, I think like the vast majority of people who are filing disavows, you have more chance to do more harm than good. So you really should consult with somebody who's done a lot of disavow work before just willy-nilly saying like, oh, I'm going to disavow all these sites. What do you think, Joe?
Right.
Yeah, I agree with you on the disavow stuff. In fact, I don't really have an opinion on that at all. What my comment was going to be about was related to guest posting. And what I've seen with guest posting is, and I think this kind of lines up with what you're saying, Marie, is the difference between like a guest post that gets traction for SEO and a guest post that doesn't are the ones where the links are somehow relevant. And so one of the strategies that I've implemented for guest posting in the past is I'll create a piece of content on my site or my client site that is kind of structured in a way where there are individual points being made within the content, or maybe the content is broken into sections, and then go out, and if I'm going to do a guest post, I'll take one of those sections in the original article that I wrote and write an entire blog post just about that one topic. And that gives me a relevant excuse to link back to the original article. And so I've got this new piece of content that I'm going to use as a guest post somewhere. And I can say, hey, I mentioned this same topic briefly on a previous article or a previous piece of content that I developed on my own site. Here's a link to it, that kind of thing. You can utilize that same strategy in pretty much every topic. And by doing that, it ensures that the link is relevant and you're not just spamming guest post for links. But I like the idea that you said, Marie, about how like focusing on, will the link get me business? Will it get me traffic? That's definitely another kind of factor to put in for guest posting,
Cool. Well, if everybody's good, I'll move on to another question we had that's really good. And Giselle might be a good one to start with this too, because she does a lot of content work where, they have great content and they're promoting it. So how do you calculate the value of a link? Is that a good one for you?
Yeah, it's fine. Well, I think Inga made a point of saying you in capital letters.
Right.
So I guess it's a very
you.
Yeah, me talking to me, right? No, I think he's trying to get like a very personal answer. I think in general, the way I think about link building, like Marie says, she will have her opinions are hers and that come from her experience, and also what she thinks, is what's going to happen with Google, or penalties or things like that. I think for me, a valuable link is a link that I didn't manipulate in any way. Mm-hmm. So the most valuable link is going to be a link that I didn't chase, right? So the one that you wake up in the morning and say, wow, look at that. I didn't build that link. That's a valuable link to me. Now, of course, then we can talk metrics and we say, well, we want it to be from an authoritative domain and we want to drive traffic. And there's all these additional things that we could put on top of that. Personally, I think a link that I didn't build, that it's an organic, going back to the beginning of the internet when I was 10 and I was browsing and I would find something because somebody recommended it and I just landed on this page. Those are the links that to me are the most valuable. And the easiest way for me to know whether they happened is just, I keep track of the links that are landing for my content, or if it's for our agency, tracking mentions, being regularly checking my Ahrefs and saying, okay, what new links do we have? Because that's how I feel about it. Then, of course, if we go into the agency discussion, I would say you want traffic. So a link that actually gets clicked, that's a good link. Like just hiding a link just for the sake of having one, just because it's a high DA page or whatever, I think that's, it's useless really, because that's not, if it's not today, eventually we'll get to a point where if a link doesn't get clicked, it's not good enough. So traffic is always a good measure. And then if we actually want to just keep it simple, you're building links, I would say trying to stay within what would be a clean way of building links. So, not using anchor text, not going just for specific links from specific pages to specific like sales pages. Even if it's a super high DA link, the reality is that if you manipulate it too much, eventually it's going to get caught. So that's a very long-winded way of saying an organic link, that's a good link. That's the most valuable link to me. But that, it's hard to measure. It's not a number, is it? So I would like to hear what Marie and Joe say. I imagine Joe would be a lot more technical than that.
That's a great answer there. Joe, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, sure. So we actually have an analysis here that we do at Proficient. It's called and we don't typically utilize it for links, but it could be utilized for links. We call it the URL priority analysis. And what it does is it basically you push in a handful of URLs and then we pull in a bunch of metrics for those URLs. And one of the metrics that we've been experimenting with lately has been internal page rank that we calculate and apply that to a URL. So what that does for us is it helps us understand the link authority on a metric level when a page gets. And so we can know, okay, we know that from a relative standpoint, we're not looking at one metric. We're looking at like 6 metrics per URL. So we know from a relative standpoint that a link on this page at this domain is likely more beneficial from an SEO perspective than a link on that page. Now, the big caveat to that is that that's just numbers, right? It doesn't look at the link's value from such a nuanced approach, like, for example, the potential for traffic and the potential for sales and the potential for brand exposure and other things that links can provide that's outside of strictly just, algorithmic SEO. But if you do want to approach, evaluating a link based on numbers, then the best way that we found is to do it with a set of numbers and not just 1 or 2 or 3. We want to see every metric relevant to that URL and make sort of a relative kind of assumption that URL is more valuable than another one. And that's just the way to approach it. You don't want to ever assume that any one metric is right. or that any one metric is better than the others. You want to just look at all the metrics at your disposal that's available, and then make relative assumptions on which pages are more important or more valuable. You know.
Cool. Marie, do you have anything to add?
I don't know if I'm going to throw this theory out here, and it's not a widely held theory. I think, I mean, I really like what Joe's talking about with the idea of figuring out the page rank calculations, and, you know, is this link going to help based on all of these other different metrics? Well, we still know that Google, I mean, PageRank is probably always going to be a major part of Google's algorithms. I have this theory that PageRank is closely connected to EAT, which we've been talking about with, you know, a lot of these quality updates, and that I think it's possible that Google only wants to count links from sites that have decent EAT. And so a site that is known as an authority in their space, a site that, you know, is trusted, like the New York Times, things like that. So I would just say keep that in mind again. And I mean, we will say the same thing over and over again about guest posting, that, you know, don't do it on a large scale, and all the things that you shouldn't do. But I would say if you are going after guest posting, kind of think like, is this site known as an authoritative site? So again, if I wanted to guest post for Semrush, Google recognizes that the Semrush is an authority in terms of SEO, and I would like to have a link from Semrush. Whereas other sites that aren't recognized as authorities in their niche, or maybe have trust issues, or really haven't been around for a long time, the whole EAT thing, that those links may not count for as much.
Murray, can you, just for the benefit of everyone, can you go through what EAT means for everyone?
That's it. Yeah. Thanks, Joe. So yeah, we talk about it so much that I forget it. It's actually like kind of a relatively new concept in SEO, but so it's all throughout Google's quality raters guidelines, which you can find online. They're published by Google. They're 160 pages. And it's a way that Google determines expertise, authoritativeness, and trust. And it's not just about, you know, if I'm a doctor and I'm writing a medical article, I might have expertise, but I might not be recognized online as an authority. And so, I mean, again, we could do a whole talk on EAT. And I recently just spoke at Brighton SEO on this. And if you go through my tweet thread, you'll see my slides that tells a lot more about EAT. But really, in my opinion, and so, I mean, Gary Ish from Google has said that EAT is primarily based on links and mentions on authoritative sites, which really sounds like link building to me, right? You know, in the past, we'd get links from pretty much anywhere. Like if somebody was willing to give me a link, I would take it. And now we recognize that, you know, these low quality directories, these article sites that nobody's ever going to read, like those links aren't good. So we want to, our ultimate goal if we're link building is to get links from sites that are authoritative.
Cool. Thank you.
And, you know, and also to Marie's point, there was a patent that Yahoo got a while back, and Bill's is Bill in the chat?
Swalski.
Swalski has written about it before, and it's called Trust Rank. And there's a lot of, I think maybe Bill also wrote about how Google has their own kind of version of Trust Rank. But Trust Rank is essentially just an engine will pick a couple thousand very authoritative domains, you know, like Wikipedia, you know, New York Times, you know, some universities probably, and they will measure the distance between your page and one of those domains within the link graph. And the closer you are to that trusted seed set, the more trustworthy or authoritative the site is. So I don't know if they're actually implementing something like that, but I really get the feeling that what Maria is saying with EAT is maybe an evolution of that sort of approach, and understanding that they will not, like Marie said earlier, they're not going to surface or rank 90% of the links on the web. You know, they're really going to be focused on the ones that actually move the needle for people, for business, and traffic. And so, in order to do that, they're only going to focus on trustworthy sites. So I think that is something to think about if you want to learn more about how EAT might work on a metric level. Think about trust rank, and think about links that bring in influence and authority.
Cool, man. I'm having a hard time trying to keep up with all these questions and all your answers. So I look forward to the transcript later, actually. We had another really good question about content, which I might, again, start with poor Giselle. How do you brainstorm content ideas?
Okay. For developing whatever content that sites will actually want to link to.
Yes. Exactly.
Okay, so in general, when I talk to a team about content, I always say the same thing, which is most people, and if you think about yourself, you're gonna come to the same conclusion. We go to the internet for two things. One is to find out how to do something. In most cases, so we want to find out how to cook, how to fix something that we just messed up, or how something works. And the other side, most cases, we go online to entertain ourselves. To read a review of something, an opinion piece or something, to go on Reddit, to whatever, watch a video. So those are the main reasons why we go online. We want to find out how to do something, how something works, or we want to entertain ourselves. So when we think about content, we try to look at those two big pillars. And if we can bring them together, that's when magic happens. If we can teach something and be entertaining at the same time, magic. You get links. If we can explain how something works and also make it super simple and super engaging, again, magic. I think people get very caught up in just thinking from there's an argument of relevancy. So of course, all of these things I'm talking about, of like doing something that is practical or whatever, that has to be relevant to your business, because if not, eventually somebody's going to ask why is this carpet site creating something about the salaries of CEOs? It doesn't make much sense. But in general, if you're trying to create something that has practical value, and you add that layer of, okay, is this digestible, and is there a reason why somebody would want to link to these and share these instead of the other 10,000 guides online? I think that's the best way to start thinking and brainstorming, instead of either on a blank page and just throwing ideas in the air. That's a waste of time. Or very prescriptive and being like, okay, so I sell carpets, so I have to do something about carpets. And it just has to be about the 3 carpets that are the best sellers. And then suddenly you are putting yourself in such a tiny box that you are probably going to come up with how to clean that specific carpet. But for that to get loads of links, then there's like a massive stretch that has to happen. So you probably want to chunk up and say, okay, so we're going to do something about cleaning carpets, but let's go online and see what are the things that are getting the most links about cleaning carpets, and let's see what else can we bring to the table. Can we add a layer of entertainment to it? Can we make it more digestible? Can we add new information? What else can we do to the stuff that is already there? So always looking at, okay, what aligns to the business that you have, what is already out there that is getting links, and focus particularly on what brings value in terms of how practical it is because it's teaching you something, or what brings value because it's entertaining. So I would say those are the best ways to start, instead of just put people in a room with post-it notes, which that doesn't end well.
Right. While I have you, Simon Cox asked a really good question. Is there a minimum number of links that you try to get for each piece of content? So do you want to answer that too?
Yeah. Yes. So when we are looking at our campaigns, we're looking at a minimum of 10 links with high domain authority.
Mm-hmm.
So these are 10 links that are hard to get. Just to bring it back to what Marie was saying, when you're talking about these publishers, you think of, oh yeah, the most authoritative publisher in the world, and you think New York Times. Joe said it, Marie said it. That's what we think. That's because it's hard to get. So when I say 10 links of high domain authority sites, I'm talking not 10 guest posts. 10 links that we wouldn't have gotten without that content. If a campaign doesn't get that, it's not a good enough campaign. we messed it up, we go back, we trace it, we start again. So that's how my team does it, but every team is different.
Well, thank you for that. Do you too, Marie and Joe, do you have any other thoughts to add on how to brainstorm good content ideas? Anybody want to add?
I'll add one thing there, and I'd like to comment on what Giselle said as well. Something that Gary Ish said recently was that Google knows if you get a link from Forbes, Google knows which parts of Forbes they can trust and which parts are very, they're written by the contributors that like any of us could be a contributor. And so again, they're getting really good at figuring out what are the legitimate, like, did people link to you because they really, really wanted to recommend your content? Or was it an exchange of, here's an article and in exchange I get a link? So that's important. In terms of content creation, one of the best things I can recommend is just find every way you can to find the questions that people have. I think that's kind of what Giselle was saying, but there was a neat little tool that I know AJ Gergich posted about on Twitter recently, where something that can scrape the people also ask boxes, which is technically against Google's terms of service to scrape Google. But if you're doing it for, one query, they're not going to get upset. And then you can see, here's all the related questions. And so as you're writing content, make sure that you're able to answer people's questions. And that's the type of content that ranks well.
Excellent. Joe, do you have anything to add to that? They had some very comprehensive answers.
No, I have nothing to add.
I don't either.
Yeah, I'm all good.
Okay, very good. We had talked about mentions a little while ago, like mentions and citations. So someone's asked, do citations still have value? What do you guys think about that? Joe, do you want to start with that since you didn't answer my last one?
I think that citations for local SEO are still important, but not to the degree that they used to be. I mean, if we started a local campaign, we'd spend hours and hours getting like every little directory that wasn't spammy but could be related. And I think, Google knows they expect your business to be listed in maybe the yellow pages or the, specific directories where other people, other competitors are listed. But the other type of citation to talk about is mentions. So, and that's actually, again, I keep quoting Gary Ish, but he said that EAT is primarily based on links and mentions on authoritative sites. And so I think that, if there's a Wikipedia article on a topic and I'm mentioned in there, then again, Wikipedia is a hard area to work your way into spammily. If I have a mention there, that's probably an authoritative mention. And if I'm linked, it's going to be it's probably a no followed link, but I still think that mention helps me. And I think that mentions on authoritative sites are something that Google looks at algorithmically. I don't think anybody can prove that because it's a hard thing to test. You can't just randomly get Wikipedia or the New York Times to mention you. But I do believe, especially for brands, if your brand is being mentioned all over the place and you're not getting links from it, it's still probably helping in my opinion.
Okay. Anybody else?
I think that also when we talk about mentions, this is not really link related. We're getting kind of off of links a little bit, but something about mentions that I think are really could be really beneficial is that I'm seeing a lot of connection between mentions and the way that Google displays and interprets entities. And so, like Marie was saying, if you have a lot of brand mentions, it's more likely that you're going to be defined as an entity within knowledge graph or featured snippets. And that's something that is quickly becoming much more important. Position 0 has an incredible potential to bring massive amounts of traffic. And you're not going to get there if you're not already identified as some sort of entity or some sort of authoritative presence on the web. And so I think that mentions and citations both have the potential to help move your brand and your or even your personal brand into that section of entity space. and really move the needle as far as things with like featured snippet, knowledge graph, coverage, that kind of thing. And back to Marie's point about getting a link or mention on Wikipedia. That reminds me of something that I always think about with link building. And I should have mentioned this earlier. We were talking about how to value a link. But for me, the most valuable links are the ones that build more links. And so if you get mentioned in Wikipedia, or if you get a legit link from Wikipedia, it's a no-follow link, but there will be more links down the road that come from that mention or from that link, because a lot of people will look at Wikipedia and they will look at the sources that are cited in Wikipedia, and they will cite those sources in their own publications. And so the potential for more links to grow out of a link like that is extremely high. And that's why I think that we're starting to see more of link building being more of like a PR practice, and more of kind of how do we get brand exposure and mentions that turn into links down the road. And I think that, citations and mentions are kind of like the first step in that process. It's mentions are the way that SEOs think about what PR people do all the time. So if you want to learn like how PR people operate and think, then think about how you would get mentions or citations.
So here's a good practical tip to bounce off of what Joe's saying. And this might be common sense for some people, but I think it'll be new to others. So here's a story of when my very first website, I used to be a veterinarian, and I made this veterinary website, and I built a tool to help you figure out if your dog ate too much chocolate, whether he was going to get super sick. And so what I did was I went into Wikipedia, and a lot of people don't realize that anybody can edit a Wikipedia page. So I went to the page on chocolate toxicity in dogs, and I added a link to my website. Now, the Wikipedia community does not take kindly to marketers. You can't just go in there and add a link. So what I did before that was I spent a good week, pretty much every day I went in and I edited a couple of other articles on things that I was kind of an expert on, and just sort of build up some credibility for myself. Now, this won't work in every single niche, because in some communities in Wikipedia, as soon as you add a link to anything, if you haven't been there for years and years, they'll take the link down. But for me, that worked. And like Joe was saying, it was a no-followed link. But now, as other people are writing articles, they're doing research on chocolate toxicity, and then they see, oh, here's this calculator, and they linked to the calculator. So just because it's a no-followed link doesn't always mean that it's not going to give you benefit.
Yeah.
Good
And
point.
sorry, if I can add one thing as well. I think there's something that Joe was talking about, which is, it's kind of PR, right? So you take it from them. Something that happens with content a lot is that you will get mentioned, and then, for example, let's say Daily Mail picks it up and they run your piece of content and they mention you, but they don't link. And then that triggers other links, and they all credit Daily Mail as the original source. And they might mention you, but they actually credit Daily Mail. And what some people do at that point is they say, oh, well, bad luck there, and at least we got a mention. But the truth is, when it comes to content, getting credit to original sources of content, that's the language that journalists talk about. So that's how you should reach out. And if they, let's say, Daily Mail, they just mentioned you and they didn't link, it doesn't mean that you can't. Look, you just share my content, any chance you can link back to the original content. If anybody picks it up, they can see it. Making sure that you do chase those opportunities, because particularly the bigger the publisher that picks it up, and if it's content and it makes sense that they link to you, right? So I'm not saying just chase any mention, even if it doesn't make any sense. But if it's content and somebody picks it up and they mention you and they don't link, try to get those big publishers to link to the content, so that the links that get triggered, they already include that proper credit back to your site with a link. So you don't have to go and chase everybody else. A big part of the campaigns that we do is just link reclamation, and sometimes because because PR teams do mentions and it's a thing that is, that it helps with brand awareness. And also because there's this big argument around, mentions are good as well. Some people feel like they shouldn't chase a link, but sometimes, the links are worth chasing, particularly when it comes to crediting back to the original source of a piece of content. So not being scared of going after those mentions and turning them into links.
That's a very good point, because I think, like you said, we do talk about mentions, and I think sometimes people are just kind of content with them because they think at least I got a mention.
Yeah.
But if it's good, yeah, I'd go after it too. We had a question.
I'll just add one more thing to that, Julie, because this is actually pretty interesting. The quality raters guidelines actually instruct the quality raters to see if the website they're evaluating actually has a Wikipedia either page or mention. And so I think, a mention in Wikipedia speaks to your EAT as well and makes you look more like an authority. So it's worthwhile to do it.
Right. Okay, cool. I had a question from chat from a while back, and actually it coincides with one that was submitted. It's about anchor text, so it's kind of two-part. So how strictly do you manage your anchor texts, and what's the best method for determining anchor text? Who wants
So
to
if you
start?
ask Google, really, if you have control over the anchor text, it's probably not a link that Google wants to count. Now, we all know that that's not 100% true. I mean, there's a reason why we build links and why we put anchor text in. And you'll hear theories of like, you need this much % keyword anchor and this much brand anchor. And honestly, I think Google's way smarter than that. So I would say, if you get a natural link and it has a keyword anchor, that's really good. Like if somebody chooses on their own to link to you. But if you have control over the link, so if it's a guest post, if it's a link that you've traded with somebody, and you have control over it, you really want to be careful about keyword anchors. I think it's okay to occasionally put in like a partial match where your keyword is sort of sandwiched in between some other words. But I think it's so obvious to look at a link profile and see when a site has been building links for the purpose of trying to manipulate their rankings. So, I think most of the links where you have control over the anchor, they can cause you problems or they're going to get ignored.
That's a good point. Anybody else have anything to add to that?
I'll just say that I agree with everything Marie said. I'll say that commercial anchor text tends to be the higher risk anchor text. So if you do have control over anchor text, my general rule of thumb is that if it's a term that you want to rank for, it's probably not a term you want to use for anchor text, because you will likely develop what I call a manipulated pattern, and get in trouble if you overuse that. I've seen instances where I've not recently, but probably about 6 or 7 years ago, I was working on a link building campaign where we built a widget. And of course, everyone knows widget style links are kind of spammy. And the link in the widget, the anchor text was so benign. I mean, there was no commercialization on it. It was a legitimate anchor text that actually told the user where they were going. It was ideal. That widget went viral, and we generated probably around 3 million links with it. Never saw any problem with those links. They went through Penguin. They went through every quality update. We never saw an issue with that. I can guarantee if we added any amount of commercialization to that anchor text, the site would probably no longer be around today, because it would have had a massive influence of spamming anchor text. To this day, if you do a backlink profile of that site, 99% of the anchor text is all from those widget links. And they've got like something like 3 or 4 million links. So you can definitely be aggressive in some areas if you are not spammy, if you're not a spammy jerk about it. A good example is if you go to Google and type in download here, you're going to pull up, I'm sure you'll pull up a landing page for Adobe Acrobat or Adobe Flash, and the term download here is nowhere on the page. And so you can see the anchor text is influencing those pages, the rankings for those pages, because millions upon millions upon millions of pages across the web are linking to the Flash version or Adobe Acrobat for those download links. And it hasn't influenced those pages at all because it's not commercialized anchor text. So that's generally the rule of thumb I like to apply with anchor text is don't do commercialization. Let it be relevant and just apply it where it makes sense, you know.
If I can build up on that as well, I completely agree with that. I agree with both of you. I think particularly when you work with content, we just leave it to the journalist or the editor, whoever we pitch the content to just link the way they want, you know, and all we ask is please, you know, credit to the original source and this is the page of the original source of the content. And something that I do see that people that work with content do, which I don't recommend, is they will say, oh, okay, so you ran this, great. Can you please link to the homepage using, you know, our brand name? And so then there's multiple articles around the web talking about content. So for example, for a client of ours, we have Home Advisor, we create something about, I don't know, the architecture of the Simpsons house, if it were to be different architectural styles, how it would look like, and whatever. And then they get links to their homepage talking about the Simpsons. Because we're pushing these brand, you know, homepage links. And actually, that doesn't make any sense. You know, if all these sites are talking about architecture and the Simpsons house, and they're linking to the page where in Home Advisor we have created content teaching different styles of architecture through the Simpsons house, that makes sense, right? Because they're actually linking to the right place. Like Joe was saying, you know, if you're creating a link to a widget and you are adding the anchor that makes sense, which has to do with, you know, learning more about this study or learning more about this widget or learning whatever, check out these architectural styles, illustrations, or that makes sense. That is organic, is natural, is the way that people link. And pushing a homepage link with a brand, you know, anchor, the way I see it is it's gonna get as bad as pushing a, you know, a commercial keyword to a sales page, because it gets to a point where it's irrelevant, where you're creating content about one thing that has nothing to do with the homepage of your client or of your site. So I don't recommend it. But then, yeah, I'm a purist, so I don't know.
It all makes sense. We've got about 10 minutes left, which is kind of amazing to me because I feel like we haven't covered a lot, but wow, we have a lot to go. I'm going to get another question that was submitted. What do you think about building links in existing content? Who wants to take that one? I mean, I personally like doing that because that's my thing, but what about you guys?
As in like contacting this,
like say finding an older article and trying to get it updated in some way.
Right.
Marie, are you there?
Marie may have frozen again.
Okay. I'll take that one real quick.
Did we lose me?
I think it's a good idea.
Maybe we lost. Go ahead, Joe.
I think it's a good idea to do that. Generally speaking, when you do that, you are able to pick an older piece of content that already has some authority and already has maybe some other backlinks pointing to it, which means that if you can actually secure a link on that piece of content, then you'll likely see traction a lot quicker. It does tend to be more difficult, though, I think, to get links on older content because the content's already built, you know, so it's hard to get someone to go back in and edit that content. But, you know, I think it's smart as long as it makes sense to do that, and as long as it's not a waste of time. You know, you don't want to hunt down an editor, spend weeks hunting down an editor to change a piece of old content if that old content is not really indexed very often, if there's no links pointing to it. So really understand what you're looking for. But yeah, I think it's an okay thing to do.
Right.
Yeah, I agree. And it's nice. The way I like doing that is if that content is ranking well.
Yeah.
So then it makes sense because they are probably already getting loads of links just because they're ranking. And then if they link to you, that's great. But yeah, thinking about why you're doing it, not sometimes, when you're building a list of target sites, you get too excited and you feel like, oh my God, I'm in 200. This is brilliant. And you start getting lost on why you are adding certain sites to your list. So I say when you realize that you are in this super high of adding sites, just stop for a minute, go do something else and come back, because you're probably going to be adding, anything and everything. And then you waste so much time, like Joe said, just chasing people to add a link. And it didn't even make any sense in the first place. So value your time more by, being more strategic with those type of opportunities.
Yeah, I think really focus on the value of those pages. I mean, if you like Giselle was saying, if you have a target list, really focus on the best targets. You don't really want to waste a ton of time on pages that aren't really ranking anymore or aren't getting links themselves. That just seems to be like a complete waste of time. So don't do that. Really focus on the pages that are already performing really well. And you're gonna find that type of outreach is if you're new to link building, that type of outreach is so grueling and so depressing that you will eventually begin to hate SEO and your life.
So true.
And
Yeah.
you'll question a lot of decisions you've made up until that point. So I would say like you really only focus on the ones that are going to bring value. And don't waste a lot of time. It's sort of like when you do outreach like that, it's kind of like online dating, because it's just one rejection after the other. So that's been my experience, at least. I don't know about you guys, probably not, but so I would just focus on the ones that you think you can really lock down. So and that's the best method to go with. Yeah.
Anybody else have anything to add to that? I can move on then. Another question that was submitted: is it better to continue to build links to a page on your website that has a small number of referring domains versus building them to the home page, which has a lot of domains? Does that make sense?
I think we're sort of just on the relevancy. Depends on where you're sending users to. And you don't want to just, of course, everybody wants to get loads of links to the home page, but if that doesn't make sense for people who are clicking on the link, then it's a link that Google's going to count. So personally, I'd rather have links directly to that page, even if it's not a money page on my site. And then make sure that page has keyword anchored internal links pointing to my homepage, my commercial pages.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to look at it. And I mean, it all has to be relevant. The link has to be relevant. The link has to go to where the user is going to find the most value. But if all things are equal, then my kind of thing has always been about deep linking, linking deep as much as possible. Links to the homepage are going to happen automatically. They're going to organically occur. If you're out there, if you're an active participant in your communities, if you are, doing things that are worth mentioned or noticing, you're going to get links to your homepage pretty easily. It's much more difficult to get links to deeper parts of the site. And so if it makes sense, then yeah, definitely try to link deep and not all of them on the homepage.
Right. We had a really good question now that I have been thinking about with somebody. You know how you have a lot of developers that will do websites and then they have like a link credit on it, maybe somewhere at the bottom or something. What do you think a good strategy is for those developers for link building? Should they continue to do that?
I have a really thorough article that I wrote. It's a few years old, but it's still really relevant. And it's everything that a Google employee has ever said about this type of link. So if you just search for footer links and Marie Haynes, you'll see this. And it's like basic consensus is if it makes sense for the user, it's probably okay. If you ask John Mueller, like most of the time he says, oh, those links should be no followed. But he kind of has hinted lots of times that if the anchor is brand anchored, it's not anchored with your commercial terms. So if you do web design and you put a footer link on all of your client sites that say web design in such and such, that you don't want to do that. But I personally do. I mean, I've built a few websites in the past for people, and all of them I link back to my web design company, so I think that that's okay. But you just have to look at the intent and also the scale. So one thing that I've seen is that people will make like a free WordPress theme and then it'll get used by thousands and thousands of sites. And now you have all these links pointing back to you from kind of spammy sites, press themes, and those probably aren't going to help you. So I'm fine with having either URL anchored or brand anchored link there. The question is whether Google's actually counting it. One of the things that I'm interested in is even clients, they have websites. You could say to them, hey, could you actually mention us on your either press page or your like, hey, we're really happy that such and such company built our website for us, and get a link from the main content as opposed to the footer, and that may be more helpful.
I'll tell you what I've done in the past. I used to do a lot of web development, and what I've done in the past is I don't normally put footer links back to my site because I thought that was a bad way to get business. It just seems like it's kind of tacky. But what I have done in the past, and this is sort of similar to footer links, is I've developed a really good relationships with my customer. If you're working with a company that you've designed their site, maybe you provide ongoing maintenance, they like you, you like them, you have a good rapport with them, you can easily go to them and say, hey, listen, can I have a page on your website? And it's basically just a landing page on the site. You keep it out of their navigation, obviously. It's not meant, to be something that their visitors would necessarily go to. But it's a page on their site that has a basic description of your company, original content, and maybe you can even place a testimonial of the business that the page is found on, to get some a little review of your business on that page, and then on that page link to your site. And then you can link to that page in their footer if you want, or elsewhere on the site somewhere, maybe in the sidebar or something. But the idea is that you're not building a site-wide link back to your site, and you're actually funneling. I mean, from a technical standpoint, you're funneling all the authority, link authority, onto that one page, and then linking back to your site. And so what that does is, from Google's perspective, that's going to look more authentic. And then also, it's just a better way to do business, I feel like, than just slapping a footer link at the bottom of your client's site, where, people are going to look at that and think, oh, well, whatever, that's just a web design company. But if you have an actual page on the site that talks about what you did for that client and how they feel about it, like a testimonial, more or less, that points back to your site, that's much, much better. It's better for business. It's a better link. And I think it's just a better way to handle that relationship with your client,
I like that idea. And with that, we are actually at the end of our hour, which seems amazing.
Oh, wow.
I feel like the four of us could probably do another 3 hours, and we didn't even get into the questions that I had as a backup in case we didn't get good questions. So maybe we'll have you guys on again. Sorry to everybody for all the technical problems. I am pretty sure the first crazy YouTube loop thing was my fault, because I don't want my daughter to hear, but I'm pretty sure that she's been on my YouTube. So I'd like to blame my child for that one. Because I always have it muted, and I'm pretty sure that happened. But we've had all kinds of crazy tech issues with internet freezing and all kinds of stuff. So appreciate everybody bearing with us. You guys have been amazing and incredibly intelligent people. So the transcript will be ready in a few weeks maybe, and we hope to see you all next time. Thank you so much for all the questions. If we didn't get to it, feel free to hit any of the on Twitter. I think somebody had put all of our Twitter handles in there. So, or email anybody. We'll be happy to do our best to answer. So thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time.